Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling something that honestly you probably think you know pretty well. The story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And here's the thing.
Okay.
Before all the stop motion and those super catchy tunes, Rudolph was actually, get this, a marketing campaign.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, from Montgomery Ward, the department store, way back in 1939. I mean, can you believe that? Rudolph started as a poem, like a little freebie they gave out to shoppers during the holidays.
That is wild. I mean, what's so fascinating to me is, thinking about the historical context. It's 1939, right? Ended the Great Depression. People needed something, a little bit of hope. And this story about a misfit reindeer finding his place, well, it's just like tapped into that need perfectly.
Talk about marketing genius, right?
Yeah.
But okay, a free poem to a full-blown TV special. How'd that happen?
It took a while, actually, like over 2 decades before Rankin Bass Productions brought Rudolph to the screen in 1964. And they didn't just like adapt the poem, they created a whole world with stop motion animation. That was pretty cutting edge back then.
Stop motion is just, it's so painstaking, right? Like those claymation movies where, they're moving every little thing frame by frame. It's crazy. But Rankin Bass took it to another level. I mean, really, with Rudolph.
Oh, they were pioneers, absolutely. So they used this technique called animagic, right, which gave their characters a smoother look when they moved, more lifelike, And for the snowy landscapes, all that snow, scholastic is what they used, and that gave it this beautiful sort of ethereal effect. So these innovations, they really set Rudolph apart from the other cartoons, the other specials that were out there at the time.
It's amazing how those little details, those technical things, can really like elevate a story. But let's be real, it's not just the visuals that make Rudolph so memorable, right? The music, it's a huge part of it, especially Burl Ives as Sam the Snowman. I mean, that voice, the warmth, it's just iconic.
Oh, casting Burl Ives was genius, pure genius. I mean, Holly Jolly Christmas. It's basically like the holiday song now. But it's more than just catchy, right? The music actually gives the story like an emotional depth. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the song itself, for instance, it starts kind of somber, reflecting like Rudolph being alone, how the others treat him. But then as the song builds, it gets more hopeful. And that chorus, it's like a celebration,
Yeah.
of how he triumphs.
It's true. The music follows his emotional journey. And it's interesting how that theme, acceptance, or maybe the lack of it sometimes, how that runs through the whole special. On the one hand, you have Rudolph finally accepted for what makes him unique, right? But on the other hand, the other reindeer, they only seem to care when his nose, when it's useful. I don't know, kind of sends a mixed message, doesn't it?
That is one of the most debated parts of Rudolph's, legacy for sure. Like, does it really champion individuality? Or is it like a story about conforming, where you're only accepted if you have something to offer? Some people, I think, they really feel like it's that second one, the conformity thing. Like, it's saying you're only valuable for what you contribute, not for, who you actually are.
It's like it's reflecting maybe a real problem we have. We talk about embracing diversity, celebrating differences, but do we actually do that? Or are we more likely to, like, accept someone if they can benefit us in some way?
That's a tough one. And what's interesting is even the making of the special, that had that same tension, that back and forth between acceptance and utility.
Oh my God, I hear this. Tell me more.
Well, so when Rankin Bass first pitched the idea, right, a Rudolph special, some TV executives, they weren't so sure. They didn't know if a story about this misfit reindeer with a red nose would connect with audiences.
Wow, so even Rudolph got rejected. What changed their minds?
Another Rankin Bass special, actually, Frosty the Snowman. That one did really well. And it kind of proved that audiences, they wanted those heartwarming stories, the ones with, unusual heroes.
Ah, so it's like Rudolph's own usefulness, right?
Yeah.
His potential to bring in ratings and sell merchandise. That's what convinced the doubters. Wow, that adds another layer to the whole acceptance versus utility thing, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you think, like if Rudolph hadn't become such a huge hit, would we even be talking about him today? Would his message about being yourself, would that still matter? It's tough to say, maybe even impossible to know for sure.
It's like even getting Rudolph on screen was kind of like his journey in the story, right? All about acceptance and what's useful. But I want to talk about another character for a minute, one who sometimes gets, I don't know, forgotten next to Rudolph. Hermie the elf, the one who wants to be a dentist.
Yeah.
Which is not what elves are supposed to do.
Oh, Hermie, yeah. His story is so interesting. It's like a counterpoint to Rudolph, right? Rudolph is like rejected for how he looks, something he can't change. But Hermie, he's choosing to be different, following a passion that, well, it goes against all elf
It's
tradition.
like, forget fitting in. I'm going to do my thing,
Look,
you know? And in a way, it's even more powerful than Rudolph's story because he's making that choice,
yeah.
you know, to be different. But then, like Rudolph, Hermes' difference, it becomes like an asset.
Exactly. The island of misfit toys, right? That's where Homie's dentistry skills are finally like needed and appreciated. He finds a place where being unique is good and his dream comes true. It's like it's showing us that our flaws, the things we think are bad, they can be strengths if we find the right spot, the right people.
It's almost like Rankin Bass are saying being useful, it doesn't have to be just one thing. Hermes not making toys, but he's still finding a way to like contribute and have a purpose, you know?
Mhm.
And that's a message that I think really hits home today with so many people finding their own paths, careers that maybe didn't even exist before.
Totally. And think of the time period too, the 1960s, all those counterculture movements, people questioning everything, embracing individuality. Hermie wanting something different, it maybe reflects that, don't you think?
It's a good reminder that even these like lighthearted Christmas specials, they're still products of their time.
Yeah.
Speaking of
Yeah.
changing times, though, there are parts of Rudolph that haven't aged so well, like the way those other reindeer treat him. Some people today, they see it as straight up bullying, which, I mean, makes you think about how the special portrays like social dynamics.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Our understanding of bullying, how much it can hurt someone, it's really changed since the 60s. Back then, maybe it was just like kids being kids,
Uh,
teasing. But now we know that even if it seems harmless, teasing can have lasting effects, especially if it's about something that makes someone different.
it's interesting how even classics, things we love, they can show like blind spots from the past. But Rudolph's still a holiday tradition for tons of families.
Mhm.
What do you think keeps it so popular, even with those parts that, maybe aren't great?
I think it's because, at its heart, it's a really good story. Even with the flaws, Rudolph is about things we all feel. Wanting to belong, being scared to be different, hoping that our differences, that they'll be like seen as good things someday. Those themes, they connect with people no matter their background or when they grew up. And honestly, the special itself, it's just so well made.
Totally. The animation, the music, the ending, it all just comes together. It's like a ritual for some families, a way to connect with each other and with the feeling of the holidays.
That ritual part is important, I think. It's something families do every year. It creates a connection, a shared experience. And so many adults, they have good memories of watching Rudolph as kids. That just makes it even stronger, that tradition.
It's amazing how those childhood memories, they stick with you
Yeah.
and they affect how you see things, even as an adult. But beyond just the nostalgia, there's something about Rudolph, it's hopeful,
Mm.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that still resonates with people.
Yeah, even when he's rejected, when he's alone, Rudolph never gives up. And in the end, it's his difference that saves Christmas. It's like a message about being rebelliant, that what makes us different, it can be our biggest strength.
It's almost like an antidote to all the bad stuff in the world, especially when times are tough. Rudolph says, even if you're the underdog, you can still make a difference.
And the music makes that even stronger, that message of hope. We talked about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer earlier, but even songs like, oh, we're a couple of misfits or the island of misfit toys, they're celebrating finding a place where you belong, even if it's unexpected.
Yeah, it's true. The music takes what could be a sad story about being left out and turns it into like a celebration of being yourself and finding your people. But we've been talking a lot about the characters in this story, and I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the stop motion animation itself. I remember watching it as a kid being like mesmerized by those puppets moving around.
Rankin Bass, they were masters, truly. Stop motion, it takes so much time, so much detail, it's unbelievable. And they created characters that were so expressive and these worlds that felt real, and it still holds up today.
It's not just the technical skill though, right? It's the artistry. The way they used lighting, shadows to create the mood, little gestures for emotion, the detail in the sets, the costumes, it all adds to the magic.
It's like a reminder that sometimes the best stories, they're told in the simplest ways. Stop motion, it has a charm to it, a realness that's hard to get with computers doing all the animation these days. It's like you can feel the person, the artist in every frame.
And that feeling that it's handcrafted, that adds to the nostalgia, I think, and how we connect to Rudolph. It's like a connection to a simpler time. Before
Yeah.
everything was like computer graphics. But speaking of modern tech, it's funny, stop motion, it's kind of made a comeback lately.
Oh, absolutely. Filmmakers like Wes Anderson, Tim Burton, they've used stop motion. And it shows that this old technique, it can still be powerful for telling stories, making you feel things. And technology, it's made it even easier to do now, more versatile. Artists can do even more with it.
It's like stop motion came full circle from something not a lot of people did to being popular again, reinvented. Maybe Rudolph had something to do with that, keeping it alive, inspiring people.
That's a great thought. It really is. It shows how important Rudolph is, not just as a Christmas special, but as like an example of how powerful stories can be and how creative people can be with art. But I think we're getting close to the end of our deep dive here. Before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to think about.
It's amazing, how that simple style can still like capture our imaginations.
Yeah.
But before we get too nostalgic, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, like the time when Rudolph was created historically. We mentioned the poem being from 1939 during the Depression, but I think it's worth like really digging into that.
Yeah, it's so important to remember the world was a very different place back then. I mean, the Depression, it had affected everyone. People were struggling, jobs, money, just not knowing what the future held.
Hmm.
Entertainment, things to do, it was limited. So something like a free poem, it was a way to escape, even for a little bit, from all that hardship.
And Rudolph's story, all about hope and not giving up, that must really hit home for people back then.
Absolutely. Here's this character, he's different, made fun of, but he still succeeds in the end. Classic underdog story, right?
Mhm.
And people needed that little bit of hope.
It's like Rudolph became, I don't know, a symbol of like the American spirit.
Mm,
That idea of like, we can do it even when things are tough, they'll get better.
I like that. Rudolph's story, it tapped into that belief, that you can overcome anything. And that message, it wasn't just for the Depression, it became something timeless that people still connect with.
Which brings up another point, how Rudolph's story has changed over time, right? We talked about the poem to TV special, but there's been so much more, spin-offs, different versions, even plays. Why do you think Rudolph is so adaptable, so lasting?
I think it goes back to what we were saying about stories and themes that everyone understands. Rudolph, it's about wanting to fit in, being scared to be different, but also hoping those differences will be seen as good things. Those are things everyone feels, no matter where they're from or when they live, so Rudolph can connect with so many people.
And don't forget nostalgia. For a lot of people, Rudolph isn't just a story, it's a childhood memory, a connection to simpler times, holidays with family.
Nostalgia's huge, yeah. Those early memories, they shape how we feel about the story, and that makes us want to go back to it year after year. And when we share those memories with, the next generation, that keeps the nostalgia going, so Rudolph keeps living on.
It's like he's become part of how we experience the holidays, a symbol of like happiness, togetherness, that feeling of the season. But before we get too mushy, there's one more thing about Rudolph we haven't really talked about. How successful he is commercially.
Oh, right, we can't forget that. Rudolph started as a way to sell more stuff, right? For Montgomery Ward. And that's continued, all the merchandise deals, even theme park stuff.
It's amazing how popular he still is, but it makes you wonder about art and money, you know. Does all the commercial stuff, does it make Rudolph less artistic? Or is this because it's a great story, that it can be both a story and a product?
That's a tough one. A lot of people debate that. Critics, fans, some say all is selling, it hurts the message, it turns something sweet into like a money-making machine. Others say it's just natural, it shows how much people love Rudolph, that it can be both.
It's like a reminder that even stories that seem simple, they can get caught up in all the complicated stuff about like business and making money. But I think in the end, it's up to each person how they see Rudolph. Some might not like the commercial side, others might think it's fun, part of the nostalgia.
Exactly. There's no one right answer. What's important is that Rudolph makes us think, makes us talk, even after all these years. It shows that this story about a reindeer with a shiny nose, it still has something to say about who we are, what we think is important.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Thanks for coming along with us. We hope you enjoyed learning about, where he came from, how he's changed, and why he's still so loved.
And keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts, your memories, what Rudolph means to you. We'd love to hear it.